Okay, well, good morning. For me, it's a good day to start the day. And is it the energy of the Chris, or is it the same as fishing or um, listening to music? Sometimes, right on this moment, I'm thinking very much about some things that I'm working on, and sitting here, it gives me some time to think. So spirituality, sometimes people think about ghosts or whatever, but sometimes it's quite simple. You sit down, you come to yourself, you think, okay, what should I do? How should I solve it? And ideas come, So don't make it too, let's say, spiritual, too fake. It's quite simple. I think that's for everybody. Sometimes it's good to sit in the nature and think about your things that you want to think about, and mostly it gives a solution. Okay, let me tell you something that now we're talking about spirituality, about the Chris and the energy of the Chris. And well, I told you last time that the Chris, you need to store the Chris on a high point. Well, this is not real. I put the Chris here just because this is not a place where I put the Chris. But it's just as an example. These Chris, normally I don't keep them here. I store them in a bag and I keep them in a high place in the house, and that's not here. My most important Chris are way above my head. Those three Chris are here. Within the center, the Chris of my father, and on the right side, my personal Chris made by Empu Ika Arista. But sometimes, Chris, this is from my dear friend John, is a very powerful pusaka, He kept them like this, on a high place, in the stand, so I keep it in the stand. So if I don't know, and people bring me a Chris, and I don't know about Chris, but then I store them in a singap, in the bag. But a Chris like this, I know how he was stored, and I always store it like this. And this is also very interesting. These are pusakas from Pa Jody and his wife, lovely wife, Laisa. They're both Indonesian. He's from Java, I think, and she's from the Molucca. And Moluccan people, they don't have the real tradition of the Chris, but they are very spiritual, I know them. I like Moluccans very much because they were also fighters like my grandfather, who's from Madura. And I've met a lot of Moluccan people. They're so spiritual, they know how to work with the Chris. So watch out, that they don't have the real tradition, but they're coming from Indonesia, and they're doing something with the Chris. And if you look at all the islands of we have a link. And the link is between the original people who lived on all the islands in Indonesia. We call them the Alifura. And most people know the Alifura. They know them because here on the bottom you see some Chris, and most people will say that these are tourist Chris. Well, with that puppet on top. Well, they've got real blades, not the best blades, because the blades are used. You can load Chris with a negative energy. And all those Chris coming from people who don't know each other, but all had the same story. They had a lot of misfortune, in life. And that's how they came to me, those Chris. And well, what the Indonesian did, they took some old blades, they put a negative energy in it, and then sold it to Dutch soldiers. And indeed, it helped, because those people didn't know each other. But even years and years later, they still were very unlucky in life. So I understand that you call it tourist Chris, but believe me, in the time of independence, Indonesians were not that loyal to the Dutch, so they sold them real Chris with a bad energy. But this puppet, who is this person over here? Let me show you the real example of the Keris, you know, and then we go here. Here you can see the real puppet. If you look at the hair, you can see that it has waved hair. Me too, I'm bald now, but if I let my hair grow, I've got something like a afro, you know. I've got I've got curly hair. And if you look at the side, you see the feathers. You see the feathers. Now this is a alifura. And this is a real Keris from Madura. And like the Moluccans, like the Balinese, we all believe that the old people from Indonesia, and they were black and they had curly hair, just like the Aboriginals in Australia, the Alifure, and that's the link between the people who live in the islands, let's say in the east of Java. Now let's go back a little bit, explanation about the people of Indonesia. Well, if you look at this Keris, and now this is quite interesting. Collectors would call this campur, mixed. And if you look at the Keris, you know, then it's clearly not built from some kind of, let's say, a royal palace way of dressing the Keris. That's not important, and let me explain why. And this is where the danger comes from collecting. For collectors, they judge the Keris on the level of the owner. So the royal Keris, you know, with let's say gold and diamonds, etc., you know, and dressed exactly according to the time frame. Also the blade is exactly, well, that has the highest value. But let me tell you something about what really happens. So Jordi and Laisa, let's say 25 years ago, they wanted to have real Keris for protection. So they went to Indonesia, of course, and they talked around, and they told them, okay, come back, we finish it for you, and come back later, and we're going to have your Keris. They store this Keris like this, the pusaka. So I also store them like this, you know. I always ask people, how did you treat your Keris? And I do exactly the same. So I don't put them in the singap. If you look at this Keris, and if you look at the mendak and the salute, you can see it's the typical mendak salute that were used, let's say, so 25 years ago, around that time. If you look at this Keris, you can see the same, yeah? So what happened? They used an old braid. Normally I don't take this Keris out of the sheet, but I want to show you, then you've got a good, let's say, example on how real pusakas are being made. And not only from the royal families, but because this is quite interesting. If you go to the palaces, you find a lot of Keris, you know, but these are the only Keris from those people. So they are much more powerful because they put all their attention, all the guard, all their luck inside only those two Keris. And of course, the Keris in the palace, in the kratons, were very good. Let's say they were never neglected. Of course not. Of course not. But if you only have two or one Keris, then you put all your attention in this Keris. And my experience, those Keris are much more powerful. So let me take it out and let me show you what happened. Well, you can see this is an old grip, old sheet. You can see that this is the old way of dressing the Keris, you know. I think they put this on it to give it more value, and it has to do with the spiritual value. But if you take the Keris out, you can see it's an old single barong, you know, single barong. Single barong is the lion. It's not really a lion because there is no lion in Indonesia, but it's a spiritual meaning. I'm sorry to take it out like this. I'm so sorry. Well, let me put this away because this is not good what I'm doing now. Okay, just a moment. I'm sorry, Keris. So, there you go. So if you look at this Keris right now, then you can clearly see this is an old one. And it's a little bit worn out, you see, because you can see through the Keris. Yes, it's a chombong, but it's not a real chombong. It's not made as a chombong, you know. Chombong means the space here, and so they use an old Keris. And the other Keris here, if you look at the pendok, if you look at the dress, you can see that this was not the original dress, you see. And also this mendak salute is a typical one you find, let's say 25 years ago. And this is quite interesting because this is also single barong, you see? And if you compare them to each other, let me put it here, then you can see that this is especially made. Okay, so we've got an old one and we've got one who is especially made to make a pair. And they are a pair. They are made as a pair. So this one is the old one and this is the new one. They made it especially. We're talking about 25 years ago. Well, at that time, because during the Japanese time until 1998, people with Keris were being picked up and a lot of them are being killed. But they could not stop the tradition of the Keris in Indonesia because the tradition is so powerful. And at this moment you can buy everything of the Keris, but at that moment you could not buy everything. So they made a Keris, they were looking for a sheet and they changed the sheet like this so it could fit and they could give the Keris with the people to protect their house. And that's what they did, those two Keris. So it's not campur. If you look at it from only, let's say, 2023, where you can buy and get everything, but you have to go back in time. And if you look back in time, then you will understand 25 years ago, it was a different way of working. So they were looking for things. These are both also recent, so they put it on to give it more value to the Keris. They made a pair of them. They used the old way of dressing. They were looking for another way to put the new Keris in, so you could call it campur from the way of looking at it as a collector. But if you look at it from spiritual way, you will understand that this was at that moment the right way to dress the Keris. Okay, let me put them back now. Just one moment. So it means that not all Keris were put together to sell it, because they were already sold and they told them, welcome back and we've got a pair for you. You also have to look back at that time, what was available and what was available to use, because these Keris are very powerful. You know, I started giving sajen, feeding the Keris, and wow, the single barong are very strong Keris. Don't forget it. They are some of the most powerful Keris there are. And the single barong, the king of the spirits, is also a symbol very much used by the Priaji of Indonesia. Well, so this is maybe a little bit a different topic, because I wanted to tell something about, the Keris pusaka, and not the one coming from the Keraton, but used by people who wanted to have some Keris for protection. And I can assure you, most of the times those Keris are much more powerful, but because all the attention of the people were going to only those two Keris. So they're very precious to me. And terima kasih Pak Jordi and his lovely wife, Liza.